Hello, so today's chapter is chapter number 17, Breathing and Exchange of Gases. As you have read earlier, oxygen is utilized by organisms to indirectly break down simple molecules like glucose, amino acid, fatty acid, etc. to derive energy to perform various activities. Carbon dioxide, which is harmful, is also released during the above catabolic reactions. It is therefore evident that O2 has to be continuously provided to the cells and CO2 produced by the cells have to be released out. This process of exchange of O2 from atmosphere with CO2 produced by the cells is called breathing, commonly known as respiration. Place your hand on your chest. You can feel the chest moving up and down. You know that it is due to breathing. How do we breathe? The respiratory organs and the mechanism of breathing are described in the following section of chapter. Respiratory organs. Mechanism of breathing vary among different groups of animals depending mainly on their habitats and level of organization. Lower invertebrates like sponges, coelentrates, flatworms, etc. exchange oxygen with carbon dioxide by simple diffusion over their entire body surface. Earthworms use their moist cuticle, and insects have a network of tubes to transport atmospheric air with the body. Special vascularized structures called gills are used by most of the aquatic arthropods and mollusks, where vascularized bags called lungs are used by terrestrial forms for the exchange of gases. Among vertebrates, fishes use gills, whereas amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals respire through lungs. Amphibians like frog can respire through their moist skin, cutaneous respiration also. Human respiratory system. We have a pair of external nostrils opening out above the upper lips. It leads to a nasal chamber through the nasal passage. The nasal chamber opens into pharynx, a portion of which is common passage for food and air. The pharynx opens through the larynx region into trachea. Larynx is a cartilaginous box which helps in sound production and hence called the sound box. During swallowing, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis to prevent the entry of food into larynx. Trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity which divides at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra into a right and left primary bronchi. Each bronchi undergoes repeated divisions to form the secondary and tertiary bronchi and bronchioles ending up to very thin terminal bronchioles. The trachea, primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles are supported by incomplete cartilaginous rings. Each terminal bronchiole gives rise to a number of very thin, irregular walled and vascularized bag-like structure called alveoli. The branching network of bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli comprises the lungs. We have two lungs which are covered by a double-layered pleura with pleural fluid between them. It reduces friction on the lung surface. The outer pleural membrane is in close contact with the thoracic lining, whereas the inner pleural membrane is in contact with lung surface. The part starting with the external nostrils up to the terminal bronchioles constitute the conducting part, whereas the alveoli and the ducts form the respiratory or exchange part of the respiratory system. The conducting part of transports the atmospheric air to alveoli, clears it from foreign particles, humidifies and also brings the air to body temperature. Exchange part is the site of actual diffusion of O2 and CO2 between blood and atmospheric air. The lungs are situated in the thoracic chamber, which is an anatomically an airtight chamber. The thoracic chamber is formed dorsally by the vertebral column, ventrally by the sternum, laterally by the ribs, and on the lower side by the dome-shaped diaphragm. The anatomical setup of lungs is thorax is such that any change in volume of thoracic cavity will be reflected on the lung cavity. Such an arrangement is essential for breathing as we cannot directly alter the pulmonary volume. Respiration involves the following steps. First, breathing or pulmonary ventilation by which atmospheric air is drawn in and CO2 rich alveolar air is released out. Diffusion of gases across alveolar membrane. Transport of gases by the blood. Diffusion of O2 and CO2 between blood and tissues. Utilization of O2 by the cells for catabolic reactions and resultant release of CO2. Mechanism of breathing. Breathing involves two stages: inspiration, during which atmospheric air is drawn in, and expiration, by which the alveolar air is released out. The movement of air into and out of the lungs is carried out by creating a pressure gradient between the lungs and the atmosphere. Inspiration can occur if the pressure within the lungs, that is intrapulmonary pressure, is less than the atmospheric pressure. That is, there is a negative pressure in the lungs with respect to atmospheric pressure. Similarly, expiration takes place when the intrapulmonary pressure is higher than the atmospheric pressure. The diaphragm and specialized set of muscles, external and internal intercostals between the ribs, help in generation of such gradients. Inspiration is initiated by the contraction of diaphragm, which increases the volume of thoracic chamber in the anterior-posterior axis. The contraction of external intercostal muscles lifts up the ribs and sternum, causing an increase in volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. The overall increase in thoracic volume causes a similar increase in pulmonary volume. An increase in pulmonary volume decreases the intrapulmonary pressure to less than the atmospheric pressure, which forces the air from outside to move into the lungs. That is inspiration. Relaxation of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles returns the diaphragm and sternum to their normal positions and reduce the thoracic volumes and thereby the pulmonary volume. This leads to an increase in intrapulmonary pressure to slightly above the atmospheric pressure, causing the expulsion of air from the lungs, that is expiration. We have the ability to increase the strength of inspiration and expiration with the help of additional muscles in the abdomen. On average, a healthy human breathes 12 to 16 times per minute. The volume of air involved in breathing movements can be estimated by using a spirometer, which helps in clinical assessment of pulmonary functions. Respiratory volumes and capacity. First, tidal volume. Volume of air inspired or expired during a normal respiration. It is approx 500 ml. That is, a healthy man can inspire or expire approximately 6,000 to 8,000 ml of air per minute. Second, inspiratory reserved volume. Additional volume of air a person can inspire by a forceful inspiration. This averages 2,500 ml to 3,000 ml. Third, expiratory reserve volume. Additional volume of air a person can expire by a forceful expiration. This averages 1,000 to 1,100 ml. Fourth, residual volume. Volume of air remaining in the lungs even after a forceful expiration. This averages 1100 ml to 1200 ml. By adding up a few respiratory volumes and described above, one can derive various pulmonary capacities which can be used in a clinical diagnosis. Inspiratory capacity. Total volume of air a person can inspire after normal inspiration. This includes tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume, that is TV plus IRV. Expiratory capacity. Total volume of air a person can expire after a normal inspiration. This includes tidal volume and expiratory reserved volume, that is TV plus ERV. Functional residual capacity. Volume of air that will remain in the lungs after a normal expiration. This includes ERV plus RV. Vital capacity, the maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after a forced expiration. This includes ERV, TV, and IRV on the maximum volume of air person can breathe out after a forceful inspiration. Total lung capacity, total volume of air accommodated in the lungs at the end of forced inspiration. This includes RV, ERV, TV, and IRV or vital capacity plus residual volume. Exchange of gases. Alveoli are the primary sites of exchange of gases. Exchange of gases also occur between blood and tissues. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged in these sites by diffusion, mainly based on pressure and concentration gradient. Solubility of gases as well as the thickness of membranes involved in the diffusion are also some important factors that can affect the rate of diffusion. Pressure contributed by individual gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure and is represented as PO2 for oxygen and PCO2 for carbon dioxide. Partial pressure of these two gases is atmospheric air, and the two sites of diffusion are given in table 17.1. And in figure 17.3, the data given in the table clearly indicates a concentration gradient for oxygen from alveoli to blood and blood to diffuse. Table 17.1, partial pressure in Hg of oxygen and carbon dioxide at different parts involved in diffusion in comparison to those in atmosphere. Respiratory gas O2 in atmospheric air is 159, in alveoli is 104, in blood which is deoxygenated is 40, in blood which is oxygenated is 95, and in tissues it's 40. Respiratory gas carbon dioxide in atmospheric air is 0.3, in alveoli is 40, in deoxygenated blood is 45, and in oxygenated blood is 40, and thereby in tissues is 45. A gradient is present for CO2 in the opposite direction, that is from tissues to blood and from blood to alveoli. As the solubility of CO2 is 20 to 25% higher than that of O2, the amount of CO2 that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure is much higher compared to that of O2. The diffusion membrane is made up of three major layers, namely thin squamous epithelium of alveoli, endothelium of alveolar capillaries, and basement substances in between them. However, its total thickness is much less than a millimeter. Therefore, all the factors in our body are favorable for diffusion of oxygen from alveoli to tissues and that of carbon dioxide from tissues to alveoli. Transport of gases. Blood is the medium of transport for O2 and CO2. About 97% of oxygen is transported by RBCs in the blood. The remaining 3% of oxygen is carried in dissolved state through plasma. Nearly 20 to 25% of CO2 is transported by RBCs, whereas 70% of it is carried out by bicarbonate ions. About 7% of CO2 is carried out by dissolved state through plasma. Transport of oxygen. Hemoglobin is red-colored iron-containing pigment present in RBCs. Oxygen can bind with hemoglobin in a reversible manner to form oxyhemoglobin. Each hemoglobin molecule carry a maximum of 4 molecules of O2. Binding of oxygen with hemoglobin is primarily related to partial pressure of oxygen, partial pressure of carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion concentration, and temperature are the other factors which can interfere with this binding. A sigmoid curve is obtained when percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is plotted against the dissociation curve and is highly useful in studying the effect of factors like PCO2, H plus ion concentration, etc. on binding O2 with hemoglobin. In the alveoli, where the high PO2, low PCO2, lesser H plus concentration, and lower temperature, the factors are all favorable for the formation of oxyhemoglobin, whereas in the tissues where low PO2, high PCO2, high H plus concentration, and higher temperature exist, the conditions are favorable for dissociation of oxygen from the oxyhemoglobin. This clearly indicates that O2 gets bound to hemoglobin in the lung surface and gets dissociated at the tissues. Every 100 ml of oxygenated blood can deliver around 5 ml of O2 to the tissues under the normal physiological conditions. Transport of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is carried by hemoglobin as carbaminohemoglobin, about 20 to 25%. This is binding is related to the partial pressure of CO2. CO2 is major factor that could affect the binding. When partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high and partial pressure of oxygen is low in the tissues, more binding of carbon dioxide occurs. Whereas when the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low and partial pressure of oxygen is high in the alveoli, dissociation of carbon dioxide from carbaminohemoglobin takes place. That is, carbon dioxide, which is bound to the hemoglobin from the tissues, is delivered to the alveoli. Red blood cells contain a very high concentration of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase, and minute quantities of same is present in plasma too. This enzyme facilitates the following reaction in both directions. When carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of enzyme carbonic anhydrase reacts, it gives H2CO3. And again H2CO3 in presence of carbonic anhydrase reacts, it gives HCO3 minus plus H plus. At the tissue site where partial pressure of CO2 is high due to catabolism, carbon dioxide diffuses into blood and forms bicarbonate and H plus. At the alveolar site where partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low, the reaction proceeds in the opposite direction, leading to the formation of carbon dioxide and water. Thus, carbon dioxide trapped as bicarbonate at the tissue level and transported to the alveoli is released out as carbon dioxide. Every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood delivers approximately 4 ml of CO2 to the alveoli. Regulation of respiration. Human beings have a significant ability to maintain and moderate the respiratory rhythm to suit the demands of the body tissues. This is done by the neural system, a specialized center present in the medulla region of brain called respiratory rhythm center is primarily responsible for the regulation. Another center present in the pons region of blood called pneumotaxic center can moderate the function of respiratory rhythm center. Neural signal from this center can reduce the duration of inspiration and thereby alter the respiratory rate. A chemosensitive area is situated adjacent to the rhythm center, which is highly sensitive to CO2 and hydrogen ions. Increase in these substances can activate this center, which in turn can signal the rhythm center to make necessary adjustment in the respiratory process by which these substances can be eliminated. Receptors associated with the aortic arch and carotid artery also can recognize changes in CO2 and H plus concentration and send necessary signals to the rhythm center for remedial actions. The role of oxygen and regulation of respiratory rhythm is quite insignificant. Disorders of respiratory system. Asthma is a difficulty in breathing causing wheezing sound due to inflammation of bronchi and bronchioles. Emphysema is a chronic disorder in which alveolar walls are damaged due to which respiratory surface is decreased. One of the major causes of this is cigarette smoking. Occupational respiratory disorders. In certain industries, especially those involving grinding or stone breaking, so much dust is produced that the defense mechanism of the body cannot fully cope with the situation. Long exposure can give rise to inflammation leading to fibrosis, proliferation of fibrous tissues, and thus causing serious lung damage. Workers in such industries should wear protective masks. Thank you. Bye.